as these convictions prove. These cases represent only the tip of the iceberg. There are many victims who never come forward due to fear or, in some cases, death. Ritual abuse is not conducted in public, but always occurs in seclusion, where the risk of exposure is minimized. Those who have accidentally discovered rituals in remote areas have sometimes become victims themselves, and since ritual abuse participants are reluctant to testify against one another, many cases cannot be prosecuted because of a lack of sufficient evidence. I have become concerned with the recent criticism by those who would deny the very existence of SRA. This controversy has made it even more difficult for the victims of these satanic crimes to get help. In some cases where substantial evidence could have been provided, the cases were not investigated diligently because the prosecutors doubted the reality of SRA. Many times, prosecutors are reluctant to mention satanic elements of the crime when the case comes to trial, thinking that it will make conviction more difficult. Sometimes prosecutors and others in the criminal justice system are reluctant to do an adequate investigation in a particular case because they deny the existence of SRA. Their denial determines the course of the investigation, or rather, it prevents an adequate investigation from ever occurring. An excellent example of a law enforcement officer with this mindset is Ken B. Lanning. Lanning is a special supervisory agent assigned to the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Lanning has stated for the record, "After all the hype and hysteria is put aside, the realization sets in that most satanic or occult activity involves the commission of no crimes, and that which does usually involves commission of relatively minor crimes such as trespassing, vandalism, cruelty to animals, or petty thievery." Mr. Lanning's bias regarding the existence of hardcore satanic crime has forced him to reach some ridiculous conclusions. The 1988 ritual murder trial of Clifford St. Joseph in the state of California is a case in point. These are the documented facts in the case. The corpse was mutilated so badly that it could not be identified. The corpse had been sodomized. The wrist, ankles, back, and buttocks had been slashed. The testicles were mutilated. The blood had been drained from the body. The right eye had been removed and the eye socket filled with hot wax. A pentagram was carved into the chest of the victim. After reviewing the evidence, the FBI's Mr. Lanning determined that it was not a satanic murder, but a homosexually motivated sex crime. The bias of Mr. Lanning and some others is so extreme that one wonders what evidence would be required to convince them that satanic ritual abuse exists. The traditional belief that child molesters should be held responsible for their actions and that the victims are innocent is not accepted by some in our criminal justice system. They try to attribute part of the blame to the victim, minimizing the responsibility of the perpetrator for his actions. A case in point is provided again by Ken Lanning of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Lanning wrote a chapter for the 1992 book on Satanism and ritual abuse called Out of Darkness. The book is currently published by Lexington Books. Lanning's chapter is entitled A Law Enforcement Perspective on Allegations of Ritual Abuse. In it, Lanning writes, "There is another myth that is still with us and is far less likely to be discussed. This is the myth of the victim as a completely innocent little girl walking down the street, minding her own business. It may be more important to dispel this myth than the myth of stranger danger, especially when talking about the sexual exploitation of children in child sex rings. Society seems to have a problem dealing with any sexual abuse case in which the offender is not completely bad or the victim is not completely good. Society seems to find it difficult to deal with child victims who simply behave like human beings and respond to the attention and affection of offenders by voluntarily and repeatedly returning to the offender's home. It confuses us to see the victims in child pornography giggling or laughing. At professional conferences on child sexual abuse, child prostitution is almost never discussed. It is the form of sexual victimization of children most unlike the stereotype of the innocent girl victim. Child prostitutes, by definition, participate in and often initiate their victimization. Furthermore, child prostitutes and the participants in child sex rings are frequently boys. One therapist recently told the author that a researcher's data on child molestation were misleading because many of the child victims in question were child prostitutes. This implies that child prostitutes are not real victims. Whether or not it seems fair, when adults and children have sex, the child is always the victim. Examining the thinking of law enforcement officials like Lanning makes me wonder just how far some in the criminal justice system go to protect the rights of the criminal at the expense of the victim. I believe that any attempt to shift any part of the blame away from the perpetrator and onto the child is despicable. Isaiah wrote in chapter 5, verses 20 and 21, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight." In addition to bias within some portions of the criminal justice system, bias exists in secular media as well. A November 29, 1993 article in Time magazine is a good example. The cover story, entitled "Is Freud Dead?" presented a strongly biased negative opinion against the existence of satanic ritual abuse. The article contained the following: "If some of the recovered memories of familial childhood abuse sound fanciful, the recollections of satanic ritual abuse are downright bizarre. But could such satanic rituals be that commonplace, let alone exist at all?" Yet law enforcement authorities report that not one shred of reliable evidence has turned up to support these claims. No documented marks of torture, no bones of sacrificed adults, infants, or fetuses, and no reputable eyewitnesses. The fact that this article appeared after the previously mentioned convictions were widely publicized demonstrates that some who deny the existence of SRA have not done a credible job of research. It is also the position of this ministry that there is substantial hard evidence to prove the existence of SRA. The examples I have provided are sufficient to convince all who are objective. Only those who don't want to be confused by the facts will continue to deny the obvious. Despite the flood of hard evidence that confirms the reality of satanic crime, the backlash against the existence of SRA continues. It often takes the form of what has come to be known as false memory syndrome. The following quote is also from the Time magazine article, "Is Freud Dead?" An increasing number of recovered memory accusers have recanted, and some have reunited with their families and joined them in suing the therapists and clinics they claim led them astray. Many of them are among the more than 7,000 individuals and families who have sought assistance from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, a Philadelphia-based organization that has taken the lead in publicizing the wrongdoing and in helping the victims of recovered memory therapy. Pamela Freud, who co-founded FMSF in 1992, has yet to be reconciled with her accuser daughter. The so-called false memory syndrome has become the biggest weapon in the arsenal of those that would deny the existence of SRA. The facts concerning false memory syndrome are the following. False memory syndrome is not a recognized medical or psychological diagnosis and does not appear in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM-3, or the soon-to-be-released DSM-4. False memory syndrome is the invention of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation was founded in March 1992 by a couple whose daughter, a doctor with degrees in psychology,